Good evening and welcome, everybody. I feel compelled to say, wow, what a gathering. This is like an amazing extended family reunion. All day long, I have been remembering one of my favorite things about Paul, and also one of the most nerve-wracking things, which was that Paul had pricklings in his fingertips. Tonight's event has triggered pricklings in my fingertips because I knew something very significant and important was about to happen, and that's when Paul had pricklings in his fingertips. Tonight we come together to celebrate the life and legacy of Paul and Sheila Wellstone. First of all, this is a very personal event for me because I met Paul and Sheila about 40 years ago. Don't want to date myself, because many folks who I work with were not even close to being born when I met Paul and Sheila. I met them when I was a student at Carleton. Paul was my teacher and my advisor. I spent much of my senior year of college with some of my colleagues in the room tonight, helping to lead an organizing campaign to stop Carleton College from taking Paul's job away. Ultimately, we were successful in that campaign, and Paul was granted tenure. Let's hear it for grassroots organizing, right? Many years later, I had the honor to become Paul's first Senate Chief of Staff and shared that role with Colin McGinnis, who is his next Chief of Staff, who you'll hear from later tonight. And now I'm honored to serve as the Chief of Staff for another amazing, impressive progressive from Minnesota, Congressman Keith Ellison. In short, as for many of you here tonight, knowing Paul changed my life. We gathered to remember our dear friends who died 10 years ago. Paul, Sheila, and Marcia Wellstone, Mary McEvoy, Tom Lapic, and Will McLaughlin. They have meant so much to all of us. Your presence here tonight is such a strong and beautiful testament to their lives. At an event in St. Paul, Minnesota in October, Connie Lewis, our dear friend and fellow activist, shared touching personal stories about Paul, Sheila, Marcia, Tom, Will, and Mary. The common threads were conviction, joy, compassion, humor, hard work, and determination. We also gather tonight to gain strength from each other and to renew our commitment to live the Wellstone way, and that is to not separate the lives we lead from the words we speak. Paul and Sheila taught us that politics is about the improvement of people's lives. In the year following the plane crash, Wellstone staff and friends, together with David and Mark Wellstone, formed Wellstone Action. Under the leadership of founding director Jeff Blodgett and current executive director Ben Goldfarb. I'm just looking for Ben in the crowd. There he is. Wellstone Action has grown into the premier training organization for progressive activists and candidates in the country. There are now 55,000, yes, you heard that number right, 55,000 alumni practicing politics the Wellstone way around the country. On behalf of Wellstone Action, I want to thank the members of the Minnesota Congressional Delegation, Senators Klobuchar and Franken, and House members Ellison, McCollum, Peterson, and Walz, who are the hosts of tonight's event. And I want to give a special thanks to Senator Harkin, who is truly one of Paul's best friends in the Senate. Your presence here tonight is evidence of the Wellstone legacy. But there are two people who carry the legacy in the most personal way possible, and that is David and Mark Wellstone. Mark is not able to be with us tonight, but Marcia is going to read a letter from him later. I want to personally thank David for his courage. None of us can fully appreciate the journey that you have had to take over the past decade. In the midst of everything, in an impressive and devoted and focused way, David has continued to advocate fiercely and tirelessly for two of his parents' most important issues: mental health parity and the fight to end domestic violence. A real legacy is a living legacy. Tonight, let's promise to keep the Wellstone legacy alive and moving forward for the next 10 years and beyond. And with that, I'd like to give you David Wellstone.
Thank you. Kari, one of my dad's favorite students, no doubt. Colin McGinnis as well. Yeah, I'm honored to be here tonight with you. And so let me start out. I don't really have any prepared remarks like usual. I'll be a little bit all over the place. I want to thank my wife, Leah, for being here tonight with me and all the support she's given me. I want to thank the hosts tonight, everybody from the Minnesota delegation, Senator Frank and Senator Klobuchar, Congressman Ellison, everybody. I want to thank my good friends and folks that I've worked with, Ellen Garrity and Carol McDade and Holly Merbaum. We worked hard together. Thank you for everything you guys have done. Franny, thanks for all that you do. And I know there's so many people out here that I should thank personally, because you're all, it's just, I'm emotional here tonight, standing in front of you. I'm usually not that emotional. 10 years later, the work that my dad did and my mom is really carried on, and we are very proud of that. Tonight we're going to give the Sheila Wellstone Award to Kirsten Stewart, Futures Without Violence. Later that's going to happen. I just want to say, and thank you for coming. Jamie, thank you for coming with your mom. That's impressive. We have a lot of work to do still, a lot of work to be done, but we're moving ahead. We're moving ahead. I personally have been working on the mental health parity piece in the Violence Against Women Act. For me, it's a way I can bring meaning to what happened to my folks and my sister. It's taken a while. It took me a while to get there. I say in this book that I wrote that mental health parity was one of the things that really re-engaged me in life, and it was true, to get back involved with the issues that were so near and dear to my parents' heart. And I can tell you that it's exciting for me now. I embrace what happened and moving ahead. And in that embrace, I want to try to work on the issues that were so near and dear to my folks. Thank you, Senator Harkin, for all that you've done and continue to do. I'm rambling along here, and this is a rambling little talk, so I'm going to bring it to a fairly quick conclusion. We do have some work left to do on this mental health parity bill. We've got to get the final rule in place, and we're working hard to make that happen. The Violence Against Women Act, we've got a lot of work to do, and we're going to continue to work hard on that, all of us together. If my folks were here today, they would be saying thank you. They would thank all of you. They would thank Wellstone Action, Ben, Jeff, everybody, for all the great work that's been done to carry on. And I think the best thing we can do to honor all of those who died, including the staff, is to remember those words that maybe I can come up with a different quote here, but I still like the one that you said. Let's never separate the words that we speak from the deeds that we do. And I think as long as we all do that, we're all doing the right thing. And as long as we do that in our own way, we're honoring the memory of my mom and my dad and my sister and all of the rest of those who died in that plane crash. And so I want to thank you so much for showing up 10 years later. The love that I feel from you for my family is strong, and it really helps both my brother and I to continue on and continue to do this stuff. So thank you. Now I want to introduce a great friend of my dad's. Was a good friend and a great friend before he became a senator, and a friend of mine. I remember Al spending some time together immediately after the crash, and those discussions we had stay with me. I thank you for all that you do. I thank you for your hard work. I want to introduce Senator Al Franken.
Thank you, David. Unlike David, I do have prepared remarks, so I wouldn't become emotional. That's my best defense. But I got to tell you, David, that your folks and your sister would be so proud of all the work that you've done. Sometimes politics can be a little dehumanizing, but we are lucky enough to have some people who can run for public office without losing their genuine selves. People who are remembered not only for what they do in public life, but for who they are in private. Paul Wellstone was one of those people. 10 years after his death, people across the country are remembering his passion, his political courage, and the way he worked with Republicans like Congressman Jim Ramstad when there was a chance to get something done for folks who needed help, whose lives, he could improve. But lots of Minnesotans have personal stories about Paul, stories about a man with remarkable ability to touch other people's lives and to lift them up. Here's mine. The last time I saw Paul was a couple weeks before the crash at a rally in St. Paul. I just come from visiting my mom in a nursing home, in the nursing home in Minneapolis. And at that time, Paul, of course, was in the political fight of his life, just a few weeks from the election. But the first thing he said to me when I saw him was, "How's your mom?" And I said, well, you know, there were some good days and some bad days, and today was not really a good day. It was a bad day. I really couldn't even have a conversation with her. And Paul nodded, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "You know, touch means so much." So the next morning, I went back to the nursing home, and my mom was having another not so good day, and so I brought her out in her wheelchair to the garden at the nursing home, and it was just a beautiful Minnesota fall day, and I just sat with my mom and put my arm around her. And I don't know if it meant anything to her, but it meant a lot to me. The rally in St. Paul, by the way, was just great. There was this really big, energetic crowd, and we had a lot of fun. I did my impression of Paul, which was Paul ordering breakfast. And it went like this. "I want those eggs. I love those eggs. Those are the best eggs. I want that toast. That's the best toast." Paul had this way. Paul had this way of closing out his speeches, and all of you who went to Paul's speeches know this. And it was there was this crescendo at the end with the last. It was about 3 minutes, and if he did a 20-minute speech, he started it about 17 minutes into the speech. And he'd start doing it, and everyone would be grinning, right? If it was a 12-minute speech, he would start it about 9 minutes into the speech. If it was a 4-minute speech, he'd start it a minute into the speech. And he was just electric. And you could see the passion. And he was never more passionate than when he talked about access to mental health and substance abuse treatment. And one of the most important things that I'm working on is overseeing the implementation of the law that bears his name, the Paul Wellstone and Pete Domenici Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. That law, which was passed in 2008, it requires most insurers to cover mental health services as much as and in the same way as they cover medical services. And the Affordable Care Act has actually made it so that virtually every health care plan in the country will have to do that. And the rules are a challenge. Getting the final rule on it is, but I'm going to keep fighting to get that rule, and I'm not going to ever stop fighting for mental health parity and substance abuse treatment too, and because Paul never stopped fighting. A lot of Paul's relentless energy and his incredible compassion came from Sheila. She was an amazing partner and mother long before Paul ever contemplated running for the Senate. But once he was elected, she found that she could be an incredible force for good in her own right. She traveled around the state. If you talk about VAWA, you can't talk about VAWA without talking about Sheila. And she listened to domestic abuse survivors, and we do have to get that VAWA Act done. And when you met Paul, you got the sense that nothing he did would have been possible without Sheila. They were a true team. And if you've been in the room with the two of them, it'd be just impossible to miss how much they loved each other, especially when they're holding hands, which was almost all the time. I am so honored to be here, so honored to be in the seat that Paul held. This is not Paul's seat, it's not my seat, it's Minnesota's seat, the people of Minnesota's seat. And as we celebrate Paul and Sheila and Marcia, we also remember that we lost 8 folks that day, including Tom Lapic, Mary McEvoy, Will McLaughlin, and the pilots Richard Conroy and Michael Guess, and each left behind friends and family who are grieving. So when I think about Paul, I just don't miss his progressive voice and his bold leadership. I miss his compassion, his energy, his love for his family, and I miss the man. I miss the man. Now I'd like to introduce our senior senator, and I don't know how often junior senators introduce their senior senators as their senior senators, but I am really proud and really grateful to have Amy as the senior senator, because she is one of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life. She just won an election by a little bit more than I had won mine. It reminds me of a student who studied constantly at college and was constantly belittled by his friends or by the other students. And on the way to the final exams, they said to him, "Good luck." And he said, "It's not luck I want, it's justice." Amy's margin was justice. This woman is a great senator. She's a great mentor to me. She is incredibly helpful to me in so many ways, and such a great senator for all the people of the state of Minnesota. Please welcome Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, thank you so much, Al. That was really sweet. Thank you, and it's great to be here. And I was thinking here of the last few months and this incredible election that we had in Minnesota, and how much Paul and Sheila would have loved it, because it had this feeling, I thought, of their election. Not mine, but a lot of the other races and the amendments, and there was just this excitement across the state, and I was continually reminded of them. And not just because it was the 10-year anniversary, but because these events that we had, that Ben and others put on that were incredible, one in St. Paul, one in Eveleth, and I know a few of you were there for those events, but I wish I could capture for you. Tom and Al know what I'm talking about, but the Eveleth Memorial 10 years later, with this beautiful snow silently coming down on the Iron Range, just this feeling that things were starting anew. Family members there, friends, all the people that really felt that that was Paul up there, that was his heart. And all of a sudden in the middle of this, and it was really cold, which was also typical, all the Minnesotans standing outside for an hour and a half, many without hats, and in the snow, and this baby started to cry. And I went over, because, you know, you're a politician, right? Oh, that's baby. And it turned out that this was Will's brother's baby. And they said that they had named the baby Will McLaughlin. And it's this little baby all wrapped up. And I thought that moment, the legacy lives on. The legacy lives on of all the lives that were lost that day. And legacy lives on when you meet the children, which we met in St. Paul, of Mary, that were all grown up, and with Mark and David's lives and their families, but also right here in the Capitol. On the way over here, I saw Daryl, the tram driver who has disabilities, and he's worked here for decades. And I told him I was coming over here because Jeffrey knows what I'm talking about, because every time you say you're from Minnesota, he says, "I know Paul Wellstone." And the legacy lives on as we debate on the floor at this very minute the international treaty for people with disabilities. Tom and I were just there yesterday, and I invoked Paul's name and the work that he did. And the legacy lives on as I see Keith, how proud Paul would have been of Keith and everything that he's done, and Sherrod Brown, who was here earlier, with the people that have been elected. The Violence Against Women Act, which Al mentioned, you know, we're still entangled over in the House, but we were able to get that thing through the Senate. And I thought of how happy Sheila would have been after a lot of work. And we did some pretty progressive amendments we got in there on tribal jurisdiction and other things. All 17 women senators voted for that bill, Democrats and Republicans. And I was telling David, as I was standing over here, that there was a story I'd never told about his mom ever, and it just reminded me of what a fighter she was. This was during the second campaign, and I was representing Paul in a debate with another woman, and Don Shelby was moderating. It was like a 15-minute thing. And it went actually quite well. People were happy with it. The campaign called afterwards and told me you did a good job. And I was talking about how he was getting all these contributions in small amounts, and I was very happy with it. And I think I was just at the law firm at the time. And I got a call the next morning from Sheila, because at the end of the debate, Don Shelby said, with me and the other woman, said, "Can you believe these two are friends?" After all, they went and Sheila called. She was such a fighter with that little Southern accent. She goes, "You know, you did well, but could you explain to me how you're friends with that woman?" So I remember her and that legacy. And then finally, as I mentioned, with this campaign, and I see that bus up there, and I think about how Paul taught me and so many other people how to campaign. And he taught me how to campaign on buses. And what we would do is we get on the bus, a city bus, on one end of the Nicollet Mall, and then we would drive all the way down for about 15 blocks, and we would shake everyone's hands, and we'd meet everyone on the bus, because they thought we were just on the bus. And then, because I was running for county attorney in a really tight race, and he was helping me, and we get out, we go, thanks everyone, yeah, great. And then we would just get on a bus going the opposite way, and we would go around and around and around on those buses. And at the very end, that summer, which many of you remember, when Paul had MS and he was limping and he couldn't do those parades and those festivals in the way that he used to do them, because he used to run back and forth really, really fast, and he couldn't do that anymore. But what I always remember is how he and Sheila would stand on the back of that bus in those parades, and they would wave. But they had inspired so many people, hundreds of people in those green shirts, to run around the bus that you did not even notice that he wasn't running, because he had empowered and energized so many people. And that's why, to bring it full circle, this election in Minnesota, with a 76% voter turnout, and we defeated both those amendments that had like 80% thing, that was an election that Paul would have loved. So the legacy lives on. In another way, the legacy lives on, and that is the work of my good friend Tom Harkin. And Tom, as I said, was out up in Minnesota, standing, braving the cold with no hat and mittens. And I told the story then that one of the things I love about Tom is that he is Slovenian, like me. He's come to my breakfast when I serve Slovenian pizza. And he got me in huge trouble when Al and I were up there. I'm a month out of the election, and I told the story about how Tom had come and he decided he wanted to give a pizza to every member of the United States Senate for Christmas. And he went back to his office and he found out they didn't make it in Iowa. Duh. And so he calls me, and I give him the name of the baker in Minnesota, in northern Minnesota, and I never reveal who this is. He calls himself. This is Tom Harkin. I'd like to order 100 pizzas, one for every member of the United States Senate for Christmas. And in a very Iron Range way, she says, it's Christmas and we're booked. And we don't have the pizzas to send. And then he says, well, I don't know if you know who I am. I'm Tom Harkin, the senator from Iowa. At the time, he says, I chair the Agriculture and Forestry, northern Minnesota, Committee of the United States Senate. She says, I know who you are, but we do not have the pizzas to send to a senator from Iowa. Okay, so I never revealed that name, and at this event, with Al standing there, Tom then gets up to the stage in front of 300 Iron Rangers and says, the bakery was Sunrise Bakery. I'm like, thanks, buddy. But in any case, there is only one thing, one sentence I'll say about Tom that sums it up for every single person in this room. Tom Harkin was Paul Wellstone's best friend in the United States Senate. Tom Harkin.
He'd be in trouble with that other bakery up there. First of all, Senator Klobuchar, first of all, what a great victory she had in Minnesota. Thank you so much for that wonderful victory. Great. And Senator Franken, with whom we share the same committee, we're on the same committee together. I see Keith Ellison back there. I saw him briefly. Oh, he's moving around, moving target on me there, Keith. And to all of the former Wellstone staff and friends, what a great turnout this is. Well, this is a story I've told before, but what the heck, I'll tell it again. I first met Wellstone in the 1980s. We had the farm crisis. Things were really bad. Farmers were losing their farms. A lot of farmers were committing suicide. And we were having big rallies. And so I was asked to go up to a place near Austin, Minnesota, once to speak at a big rally. And I did. I was a first-term senator then, and we were pushing something that Dave Center remembers called the Harkin-Gephardt Farm Bill. And so we went up there, and there was this big rally, a lot of farmers, and they had a lot of speakers, and I was sort of the last speaker. Senator Harkin, I'm the last speaker. The star. So they had this farm leader, and maybe Senator even spoke. I don't know if Dave may have even spoken there. I can't remember who all spoke. And then there was this guy I had never met before, and a short guy, and he had long hair, and it was curly. He had little ringlets coming down, and he had a T-shirt on, and he was really muscular, muscles. And someone introduced him. He was Professor Paul Wellstone. Okay. So I'm kind of going over my notes, thinking about, this really great speech I'm going to give. I'm going to really rev people up. He spoke right before me. As I said, up in Minnesota, it's like he just sucked the oxygen out of the air for about a 50-mile radius, And so I got up and limped through whatever I said. And I remember I went back to my staff and I said, I don't know who that guy is, but don't you ever put me on a platform after him again. Anyway, we became friends. I sort of kind of lost track of him, but then found out he was running for the Senate in '90 when I was up for my first term re-election. And so we began to kind of commiserate then, and we sort of had kind of the same views on things. And of course, I couldn't help much. I was fighting for my own life in Iowa in my re-election in 1990. But we came to the Senate. He gets elected, I get re-elected, and this friendship really starts to blossom, and we have our first day in the Senate. McGinnis may remember this, I don't know. But Carrie Moe, I bet you remember it. First day in the Senate, January the 3rd or 4th, and we were getting sworn in. And if you may remember, that was when the first Gulf War was about to start, and then President Bush had given a time to them. If they didn't do something by a certain date, we were going to attack them. And usually when we met on January the 3rd, we got sworn in that day, and then we were going to recess over until the 21st or 22nd, something like that. So I said to Paul, I said, well, I've got a little trick up my sleeve. When Mitchell, our leader, George Mitchell, gets up to do his little things after he gets sworn in, they send a resolution to the desk. When he gets to this certain resolution, I'm going to object, because it's a resolution to recess over until the 21st or 22nd of January. And I'm going to object to that because I think we should stand here and debate whether or not we ought to go to war in Kuwait. Paul said, okay. So I get there, I object, and of course Mitchell is quite taken aback by someone of his own party stopping this. And so then once I objected, I had the floor and I could speak. So I started speaking about this looming war and how it was the duty of the Senate to debate this and to vote on it. And so I went on, and then Paul was standing there, and so I yielded to him, and his first remarks were on the same thing. And so finally we left the floor and we went back in the cloakroom. Mind you, my family is sitting right above, up in the gallery above the cloakroom. And we went back there, and Mitchell came in, and I'm standing next to Paul. He's just gotten sworn in. And Mitchell comes in, and he makes a beeline to me. And he begins to yell at me. He yells at me in such a loud voice, my family up topside heard him. This is a true story. What do you think you're doing? You're disrupting this. Boy, he just went up one side of me and down the other. And then he stormed off through the cloakroom. I turned to Paul, and Paul's eyes are like this. And he says, wow. He says, is this what it's like? I said, welcome to the Senate, Paul. Anyway, we did. We stopped it. We had that debate. And I think it was one of the best debates the Senate ever had was on that issue. But anyway, I digress. But it's a night like this that brings back a lot of memories, a lot of fond memories. So it's been 10 years now since we lost Sheila and Paul and all the other wonderful people. I can tell you there's still a void in the Senate that hasn't been filled. Sometimes I say it's like the phantom limb syndrome. Whenever we're on the Senate floor discussing something about justice and peace, opportunity, what's going to happen to poor people, labor issues, you kind of expect to see Paul Wellstone back there with his hand chopping, like all of that hand chopping up and down, going on with his usual passion about urging us to do not what is the political thing, but to do the right thing. With good reason, he was respected as a conscience of the Senate. One of his very last votes, I remember it very well, and I can tell you a whole story about that too, but we don't have time. In the midst of a hard-fought re-election campaign, his last vote was in opposition to the resolution used by George W. Bush as an authority to invade Iraq. It is a measure of his political courage. It's a measure of his political courage that he cast that vote knowing it could mean his defeat. Instead, even Minnesotans who differed with him respected his principled stand. No one ever wore the title of senator better or used it less. He loved it when ordinary folks would come up to him and call him Paul. It was always a kind of an interesting thing to walk from the Senate floor back to the Hart Building with Paul. You know, first of all, you had to stop and talk to the elevator operator. Then you had to stop and talk to the policeman, the one on the inside, and then the one on the outside. And then whoever might be in between you and the Hart Building. I mean, whether it was the janitors or people hauling stuff around, he always wanted to stop to people who kept the place working. And it was just one, and they just brightened up every time they saw him. It was just a wonderful thing to see. He took it. When people would call him Paul, that people knew he was one of them and that he cared about them. I've often said Paul was my best friend in the Senate. He's one of the very few male friends I had in my adult lifetime. I mean, true friends. But in truth, Paul was one of those rare souls who so many saw as their best friend. He had a powerful authenticity that made a miner in the Iron Range know he was as important to Paul as the President of the United States. The hardworking folks he cared about most didn't have lobbyists or influence, but they had Paul Wellstone. He once said that politics is about what we create by what we do, what we hope for, and what we dare to imagine. Green was his favorite color. That. Color of the campaign bus he climbed aboard 22 years ago in his first campaign for the Senate. But Paul never meant for it to be a solo voyage. He wanted us all on board. And though Paul is no longer with us, his journey for justice continues. As Amy said, we were just recently up in Eveleth where that ceremony was very eerie. Now, that's the first time I'd been back. As I said then, I just, maybe it was just too painful, but I went. Brian Alberg, my chief of staff, who was on the Wellstone staff at one time, we went up there together, and it was eerie because the day, as Amy said, it was exactly the same kind of day as when the plane went down. Low ceiling, clouds, snowing, cold. And get this, at the end of the ceremony, we were standing outside this tent. Fortunately, I did find an umbrella. We're standing outside this tent, and the last person was a Native American who gave a chant. I'm sorry, I don't remember what tribe he was from. But he gave a chant, and he had a drum, and when he finished, an eagle flew right over the tent. Came out of the clouds, flew over the tent, flew away. Now that's something you never forget. So we do have those memorials there, but we also have living memorials that Paul would have been truly passionate about. Of course, Wellstone Action. He'd be so proud of Mark and David for all the great work and for all the people that run Wellstone Action. The living legacy includes, of course, as we said, the Violence Against Women's Act and also the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. There's one more Paul Wellstone legacy. It's our memory of Paul's passion, his convictions, his incredible capacity for bringing people together to accomplish important things. For those of us who had the privilege of serving with Paul Wellstone, his spirit is still very much with us. So a decade later, we have moved beyond our grief. What remains is the light that Paul radiated every day in the United States Senate. He truly was the finest of men.
I'm Marcia Avner. I worked with Paul Wellstone, and I'm on the board of Wellstone Action. I'm also coordinating the Sheila Wellstone Institute. We're going to do 3 more things this evening. I'd like to share with you a message from Dave's younger brother, Mark, who couldn't be here with us tonight, but who's with us in his heart and spirit. I want then to introduce to you Lynn Rosenthal, who is the first ever White House advisor on violence against women. And then we will be honoring the Sheila Wellstone honorees for this year, Kirsten Stewart with Futures Without Violence and Futures Without Violence itself. So everybody take a deep breath after being in the room with that video. Think about what Paul and Sheila would say, which before you leave tonight, be sure you thank others for the work that they do. And hear from the younger brother, Mark. I want to say a big thank you to everyone here. I'll miss the personal connections that I have with so many of you, and it's regrettable to miss an opportunity where the love for my parents is so evident and strong. This is going to be the Sheila time. Tonight is so important because we gather not just to remember the legacy of my mom and her dedication to raising the awareness of domestic violence. We are here to recognize the champions who fight for our cause. I now realize that my mom was a pioneer in her thinking in terms of domestic violence. She knew that this was a deadly, powerful, and largely unrecognized epidemic that knows no social or economic boundaries. She also knew that you could not discuss the issue of domestic violence without talking about sexual assault, trafficking, and many other issues that affect women and children, and men. My mom would be proud of the work that is being done, but would be the first to say that there is so much more to do. I want to congratulate Kirsten Stewart and Futures Without Violence for receiving the honors tonight. Thank you, and all of you in the room tonight, for your time and dedication towards working to end domestic violence. Kirsten, I understand that you worked closely with my mom, and I'm sure she would be smiling down on us at this moment. I can also assure you that my dad is proud that your daughter, Paulina, is named in his honor. Those of you who how many of you worked for Paul or Sheila? Okay, then you heard this. Then you heard this. Paul always said this to anyone who either was pregnant or even engaged to be married. He was sure that Paul or Paulina would be the perfect names for children. So special thanks, Kirsten, for your daughter Pauline and your son Jamie, who is here with you tonight. Lynn Rosenthal will join us here at the podium in just a moment. I also want to say a thank you to Lynn Rosenthal. We are very fortunate to have someone like Lynn waging this battle with us. It would be an understatement to say that Lynn has been crucial in the effort to raise awareness and shine some light on a very dark topic. Domestic violence and all the issues that fall under its umbrella are not easy ones to talk about. Special thanks to this administration, to Vice President Biden, and to Lynn for being champions for the cause. I will say that Vice President Biden had a big role in the transformation of my mom and helped give her the confidence to become a major factor in the fight against domestic violence. He was also a close friend of my parents, like many of you here, and for that, I say thank you to all of you. My mom was the rock in our family, and without her, the name Wellstone could never have reached such heights. She never wanted any credit and was the most selfless person I have ever known. It is fitting that when she found her powerful voice, she used it as a tool for the voiceless. She was gentle, kind, tough, and fiercely passionate, the very traits needed to take on such a monster as domestic violence. She would want to thank everyone here for their courage. I can't help but feel her power in the moon. Love you, Mom. And that's from Dave. From Mark, and from Dave, who's smiling. I want to ask Lynn Rosenthal to come up here. She She has been a very good friend to Sheila and to all of us at the Sheila Wellstone Institute and Wellstone Action. And we are so proud to have her leadership, not only in all the work that she has done prior to her current office, but for being the very first ever in our history White House advisor on violence against women, Lynn Rosenthal.
I'm not used to being this tall. I didn't know there was a step here. Good evening. On behalf of President Obama and Vice President Biden, I want to thank you all not only for being here tonight, but for all of the life-saving work that you do here in Washington, D.C. and communities all across the country. I am one of the people that is here tonight in large part because of Paul Wellstone. I was working in Florida in 1996 in the middle of the debate on welfare policy, and I was just a little domestic violence advocate running a shelter. And Paul Wellstone came to talk about the work he was doing. He was fighting for victims of domestic violence in the welfare reform debate. And he came and gave one of those passionate speeches that you all know so well. And I didn't know there were people like that in the U.S. Senate. So when I had an opportunity to come to Washington, D.C., I thought I can do it because someone like Paul Wellstone is there. Of course, I didn't know at the time, I had not yet met Sheila, that she was really the driving force behind the work on domestic violence policy. I was thinking coming here tonight about this event 3 years ago when the Sheila Wellstone Institute so graciously honored Vice President Biden with this award. And David had the opportunity to present it to the Vice President at his home a few days before the event. And the Vice President took it and put it right on the mantle at the Naval Observatory, and then he started telling his Paul and Sheila stories. And one of those stories was that when they first came to DC, Sheila was so passionate and so knowledgeable about social problems that he thought she was the senator. It took him a while to know that she wasn't. But Sheila, I met Sheila when I came to Washington, D.C. 13 years ago as the director of the National Network to End Domestic Violence. And Sheila was the very first person to call me and welcome me. I thought, how amazing for a U.S. Senator's wife to call and welcome someone to Washington, D.C. But within 10 minutes of the phone call, she had given me a number of assignments. Sheila's true gift in this work was her credibility. She had traveled all over the state of Minnesota. Those of you from Minnesota hosted those gatherings around the kitchen tables in the battered women's shelters. I had never met somebody who knew so much about battered women's lives. As an advocate, I was used to having to educate policymakers about the reality of domestic violence, but there was nothing I knew that Sheila didn't know, and she knew more than that. She knew even more than I knew. And she brought people together around a common vision. She was not afraid to bring people of differing views together. I have missed her so much as we've heard the debate on VAWA reauthorization this year, because she wasn't afraid to bring people to the table and talk it out. She wasn't afraid of the hot spots or the challenging issues. She knew it all. She could talk about it all. And she brought out the best in people. She brought out the best in all of us. I remember one time that I disagreed with Paul and Sheila on some obscure policy issue, something they wanted to do. And so I went and had my little meeting and said, here's why I'm not sure this is the best idea. And she said, well, why don't you go back and think about, and she gave me 10 things to think about, and I'll call you. So she called me the next day and the day after that and the day after that. I think she called me every single day, just checking in. I'm just wondering if you've had a chance to think about these issues. And of course, by the end of the week, I was convinced that her idea was my idea and fully embraced it. So that was a real gift that she had. Because of Sheila's knowledge of battered women's lives, and because of Paul's knowledge of this process here in this building, they were able to integrate work on domestic violence into many social federal programs. Sometimes today I run across a statute or a policy, a rule, a regulation, and I see domestic violence in an unlikely place, and I know that it's there because Sheila Wellstone put it there, because she saw the connections, whether we were talking about housing or homelessness, or women in the military, or children. She saw the connections between keeping women safe in their home and addressing all of the social problems that our country struggles with today. She had that big vision. She was one of the first to talk about the experiences of children from violent homes, of children exposed to violence. And every year held a reception here for 10 years with the display of children's artwork. And through this artwork, the stories of children were told, and they were profound. And as many displays as are here in the Capitol, and as many people who have come through this building, it was this display in the Russell Rotunda that people stopped and walked from picture to picture to picture and looked and began to understand the experiences of children from violent homes. And it was Sheila who brought that display to Washington year after year. I remember the last display that Sheila hosted in October 10 years ago. And we always held at the National Network to End Domestic Violence a reception as a part of this art display. And it was our event. It was something we felt strongly about because we did it with the Wellstones, and it meant a lot to our organization. But for some reason that year, and maybe it was just because we knew that Paul had a tough race, we said, let's make this as big as we can. Let's fill the biggest room in the Capitol. Let's invite as many organizations as we can to join us, and let's give Paul Wellstone a surprise award. He won't know anything about it, but we want to honor his efforts. And we just had a feeling, and I can't say why, that that year was so important, that we do as much as we could for Paul and Sheila. So, and Kirsten was a part of that night. And as we gathered to stop the program and present Paul with this award, we got up and we started telling stories about him, and Kirsten talked about her family and her children and what Paul meant in her life. And Paul turned to Sheila and said, what are they doing? Because he wasn't used to that, to people standing there and talking about his work. He said, what are they doing? And Sheila said, shh, they're honoring you. Which brings me to our honoree tonight, Kirsten Stewart. After the plane crash, Kirsten and I traveled together to Minnesota, and we attended the big memorial service, the big one. And as we sat there, we realized something. And Kirsten turned to me and said, you know, the Wellstones were not just ours. We thought of them as ours because we were domestic violence advocates and they were our people. Paul and Sheila were our people. But Sheila said they were not just ours, they were everyone's. And as we sat there that night, and you all will remember it, the tribes were there, and the veterans groups were there, and the homeless advocates, and the mental health activists. And we realized that this legacy was far beyond anything we could have imagined. And as painful as that night was, we left with such a sense of hope for the future that we could carry on their legacy. And that is what Kirsten Stewart, our honoree tonight, is doing. As Sheila did, Kirsten brings people together. As Sheila did, she keeps the attention of the nation focused on the experiences of children who are experiencing violence. As Sheila did, Kirsten is passionate, she's practical, and she carries forward her vision and brings people together to carry it out. So there is none more deserving of this award tonight, and there is no one, as you will hear in a minute, for whom it is more meaningful. When we first held the first memorial here the year after Paul and Sheila died in the Capitol, we realized as we were planning it that there were staffers here, there may have even been members of Congress, who didn't know the Wellstones, who came after the Wellstones, who knew them only by their stories. But we know, and you will hear tonight from Kirsten Stewart, that their work is carried on in all of the people that they touch. So I just wanted to end with the words that hang on the walls of many of those battered women's shelters that Sheila visited. It's an anonymous poem, and it goes like this. So I fight with one hand and love with the other. In some of my dreams, though, I love with both hands, and the fighting is over. Thank you all very much.
I'm also pleased to introduce you to Kathy Eisen, Sheila's sister, who is here with her family, Shane and Shane's husband, Kevin, and her son, Travis. And she joins me in honoring Kirsten. Kirsten and Futures Without Violence are honored tonight for the extraordinary work that they do. Please look at their website. We're in the middle of 16 days of addressing issues relating to violence against women and children and men. But for decades, Kirsten has worked ever so hard, closely with Sheila and Paul, to address the issue of violence in families, gender-based violence. She has been a force with Futures to End Violence, Futures Without Violence. She's been a force in the development of the International Violence Against Women Act, a force for the passage of the Violence Against Women Act. Her work is global, it is national, it is local, and she is bringing to the forefront the importance of this issue as it implicates and affects children and their well-being over their lifetimes. It is our honor to invite Kirsten here and to thank Kirsten and her board chair, Jackie Campbell, for the work that Futures is doing and for the work that Kirsten is doing. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll take advantage of the stool as well. So I do want to say thank you so much. It is indeed an honor for me to be here, to be a recipient of the Sheila Wellstone Award. And so on behalf of myself and Futures Without Violence, thank you. I also want to acknowledge the incredibly important work of Wellstone Action and the Sheila Wellstone Institute. And I think our elections, our recent elections, are one incredible example of both the legacy of Paul and Sheila, but also the incredibly important legacy of organizing. And that when you organize, you win. And that's an incredibly important lesson as well. I also want to, of course, thank Senators Franken, Klobuchar, and Harkin, who were there, as well as Representatives Peterson, McCollum, Congressman Ellison, and Congressman Walz, and the rest of the Minnesota delegation for sponsoring this event. It is indeed an honor to be recognized by them as well. Given the evening, we've all heard about it, and I'm going to talk a little bit more, as you heard, about both the personal and the professional legacy of Paul and Sheila. As I prepared for this evening, I went back and I looked at the speech that Lynn referenced. And it was a little more than 10 years ago, and it was, as she said, a precursor to this event, the annual Domestic Violence Awareness Month event that Paul and Sheila would put together. At the time, Lynn was chairing it as head of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and as she pointed out, she gave all of us a chance to speak, and for that I remain, and I know many others remain, incredibly grateful to this day. As we planned the event, the truth is we were worried Paul would lose. And that seems, to be honest, so silly now, because what we lost was, of course, so much more. But one of the incredible ironies, and you heard Senator Harkin, I think, reference it earlier, is that he had taken this stand against the war. And by the end, we actually thought he had a good shot at winning. And it's only one of the very painful legacies. His principled stand against the war was indeed changing hearts and minds. He brought people with him to his cause. But because we had this feeling that he might lose, we got a chance to say the things that were so important to say, and we said them. So I'd like to share a little bit from that speech because I think it captures both the incredible continuation of their work professionally and then also a little bit I will share personally. In that speech, I thanked Paul and Sheila for the work, and let's face it, as we've heard today, we know when it came to violence against women, it really was Sheila's work, and she always used to joke Paul was just kind of the front man. From our perspective as advocates, though, he was the front man that had senator in front of his name, so that was a really helpful tool. But as with then we were, as that time, we're now Futures Without Violence. At that time, we were the Family Violence Prevention Fund. Our mission was then and remains today ending violence against women and children. So you understand how Paul and Sheila became our heroes. We continue to fight today for the Violence Against Women Act, and again, you've heard about that work that continues to go on. Paul authored the Domestic Violence Screening, Treatment, and Prevention Act, legislation that saw the core life-saving power of healthcare providers as agents of change in ending violence against women. Now, provisions of that law are real. The Affordable Care Act, as many of you know, included provisions on domestic violence, screening, and brief counseling. 10 years later, what Paul envisioned is now law and being implemented by many of those in the room. Paul and Sheila had a special place in their heart for immigrant and Native American women and children, and they continually led the charge to ensure that always the most vulnerable would be protected. That fight within the Violence Against Women Act is what continues today, and it is a fight that all of us should continue to engage in. We cannot turn our backs on these communities and the progress that the Senate made and the bill that this Senate passed. And they know that violence does not stop at our borders, that this work must be interwoven into our foreign policy and into our international assistance. While we continue to try to pass the new International Violence Against Women Act, already key provisions are being put in place by the Obama administration. President Obama's recent speech on trafficking shows the extent to which a conversation that began more than 10 years ago is now creating reality and change today. The vision, the passion, the tenacious activism of Paul and Sheila lives on. I am so sorry they cannot see it for themselves, but the work of all of us in this room is a tribute to their lives. Their lives don't continue, but their work does. Also in that speech, I had a chance to thank Paul personally for being a man committed to ending violence against women and using his position of power to help victims. He also, as I said at the time, inspired me as a new parent. Now, few things in life more clearly mark the passage of time than the growth of a child. So if I could, I'd like to invite my son Jamie up with me right now. Stand next to me, okay? So other people can see you, okay, sweetie? So this is Jamie. He's 11 today. Today is his birthday. And you'll know why. I'm honored to have him with me, and you'll know why it's even more special that he's with me today shortly. When I first spoke these words, Jamie had not spoken his first words. He had not even taken his first steps. He is, however, I assure you, a young man with much to say. And there's not a thing he can't do. There's not a ball that he can't get to the back of the net or to the bottom of the hoop or catch or pitch anywhere. He's walking just fine, and he's doing a heck of a lot more as well. Now, like many new parents, I wasn't sure what I was doing. And I think any of the parents in the room know that feeling, especially of that first child. And when you hold them and you want everything in the world to make it right, and you never know if you're really doing anything right. So I looked to the people who I thought were doing the right things. Paul and Sheila's love and dedication to their children was unquestioned and unwavering. But they also seemed to believe in the need to teach their children about a world bigger than their own. So this is at that time what I said. So this is to Paul, as Lynn mentioned, had the chance to honor him in the room. I recently became a parent, and I have to admit that as a feminist and activist, I had long thought about how I would raise my daughter, how I would surround her with these strong and powerful and amazing women and send her forth into the world proud, confident, committed to doing good. I had not, however, given that same thought to what it would take to raise a boy. My basic philosophy was don't be a jerk. Well, I gave birth to that son, and I quickly realized that don't be a jerk wasn't really a philosophy for raising a child. And so I started very intently to really think about and to try to identify what qualities I wanted to offer and encourage in my son. I wanted to teach him kindness and empathy, to recognize the gifts he's been given, and to feel a responsibility to give back. I wanted him to be strong and confident and passionate about what is right, but to exercise that strength, to exercise his power in the world through fighting injustice. I wanted him to be smart and thoughtful. I wanted him to love life, and I wanted him to have an unyielding faith in the goodness of people around him and the world around him. And I thought of the men who I knew or I knew of, who exemplified those qualities. And what I had a chance to say was Paul, and that was you, Senator Wellstone. You inspire me, as I think you do all of us in this room. I look forward to the day I can introduce my son to you and tell him about all that you have done to help women and children in this country. And my guess is he will say to you what every one of us in this room says, which is thank you. Thank you for the battered women and children who you have helped, And perhaps even more importantly, thank you to the women and children who will never know violence because of the work that you've done. So with those words, I want to honor and thank all of you in this room, to thank in particular the Sheila Wellstone Institute, to think of Marcia, Tom, Mary, and Will as well, because what I understand from those who knew them, they were the equally passionate, powerful voices for ending violence against women and children in this world. I also want to share a personal note from Paul, because I think everybody, and you've heard this mentioned today, he never forgot the people that he talked to and met. And so Paul, after this speech, sent me this note, and so I share it with you all today. Dear Kirsten, never in my life have I ever been more proud and so grateful for words spoken. I will never forget what you said. Please give my love to your little boy, and we have a common bond forever. Love, Paul. So let us together take this moment to think about what's been accomplished already because of Paul and Sheila, and commit ourselves once again to do that work moving forward. Thank you again.
My name's Colin McGinnis. I was Paul's chief of staff in his second term. And let me start by saying that one of the virtues of being shackled to Congress as a staffer for 30 years is that you get an unerring sense of the ability to read crowds. And so I get the sense the natives are restless here. I'm going to do the Reader's Digest version. You'll be happy to know I'm the last hurrah tonight. I did write a couple of things down, in part, as Al said, to ensure that one doesn't choke up. I was on the Senate floor today, and so observed a couple of things. It is really wonderful to join this great gathered congregation of Paul and Sheila's family and friends and extended family and staff. I think it's a rare gift for me, and I think as I've talked with former staff and friends tonight, it's a rare gift for many of you. We've heard tonight about what a lion-hearted leader Paul was, and his warmth and his decency, his fierce commitment to justice, the intellectual integrity that he brought from the academy into the Senate, his refusal, as Tom Harkin said, to bow to cynicism, which in this day and age is getting harder and harder and is more and more of a virtue. For me, there's one aspect of his leadership that ties these things together, and I want to leave you with it. It was a gift that he shared with Sheila, and there were inklings of it in the video vignette tonight. I think it's true that all great leaders lift people up and inspire us, and that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Paul recognized that. I think rarer is the leader who is consistently inspired by ordinary people and their lives and their struggles, and who in turn can lift them up, lift their hopes, lift their sights to new possibilities and opportunities for collaboration in community organizing, in the policy arena, in the electoral arena, and elsewhere. A professor of mine used to tell me that one of the great enemies of hope was an ideal that was unattainable. Paul gave people a practical sense of the attainable, as we've heard tonight, but always with one eye sort of looking over the horizon. He was, in that way, a real friend of hope, with concrete plans rooted in tested ideals. But not only did he inspire and draw inspiration from ordinary folks, as we've heard tonight, he combined this with a gift for seeing and making connections and deepening and broadening relationships between and among people and communities. This was a skill hard won through years of his organizing. In the civil rights and anti-war movements in the 60s, with the Organization for a Better Rice County in the 70s, in the power line and family farm struggles of the 1980s, and on through his life in electoral politics to his death. Whether bringing Hmong and Somali communities in Minnesota together to work on immigration, or bringing together rural veterans and doctors to work on community-based rural health care, or convening domestic violence advocates from around the state and around the country to identify models that worked, to share ideas, and to expand the impact of their work together. Groups like Futures Without Violence, whom we honor tonight. He and Sheila were all about making connections and building relationships, finding out what works and replicating and scaling up those efforts to create a more just and decent nation. That was the people-first politics that Paul and Sheila embodied. That's a key part of the legacy Wellstone Action carries forward as they build a new generation of progressive leaders. As Jeff said in the video, we know Paul and Sheila are smiling down tonight, confident that if they can't be here to carry on this work, they know that you are. They know that we are doing it for them. And Wellstone Action doesn't do this work alone, as we've heard. 350 partners around the country, 55,000 people in the last 10 years, candidates and organizers and activists and campaign staff. That's a lot of people. It's big stuff. It's big ideas. It's the work of a lifetime, maybe of several. So thank you to Wellstone Action, to the Minnesota delegation, to all those others who organized this wonderful event. Thank you all so much for coming out to honor the memory of Paul and Sheila, Marcia, Will, and Mary, and Tom. We are all enormously grateful for your kindness and for your friendship. So there's still some food left and maybe a couple of bottles of wine. I hope people will hang out. We've got the place until about 9 o'clock. I know that there are a lot of people who want to catch up. Thank you all for coming again tonight, and thanks to Wellstone Action.